بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, brothers and sisters and friends.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I pray you all well, enjoying this amazing British summer. So, as you heard, my name is Hamza and I'm here today to talk to you about, I think, what I consider probably the most important topic anyone can investigate in their life. The reason I'm saying this is because the concept of worship, according to the Islamic spiritual tradition, is essentially our raison d'etre. It's our reason for existence. It's our reason for being. And let's reflect on this notion of having a reason to be, because it's very important for us to reflect slightly and think, what is this life really about? As the Quran says, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? And where are you going? Because if you think about it, our lives is analogous or equivalent to someone being sedated, then all of a sudden they wake up on a plane, first class, right? Now obviously maybe for the first 5 minutes you may enjoy the comforts of first class, but you're going to be asking some critical questions after at least 5 or 10 minutes. You're going to be like, how did I get here? Where is it headed to? What am I supposed to do? And if it's rational to ask these questions and try to answer them, then surely life should be no different. It's like we've been sedated for eternity, then we just wake up conscious. Now many of us, we just do what everybody else does. But I think that's an irrational position. And life, especially in the contemporary world, is full of enjoyment, is full of things that make us forget about these critical questions. We're always on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or watching the new series or playing some games or just really just having fun all the time and just always trying to find the next new fad or the next new thing to do. But I think it's very critical for us as human beings to remind ourselves of our core humanity, which is to reflect, to ponder, to really ask some really critical questions, because we have not only been given these core instincts, but we have been given rational faculties. We have been given a mind to reflect, to ponder. We have the ability to perform rational insights. We could see into a conclusion, right? We are not just based on kind of blind, non-conscious realities, but rather we can take ideas and move them forward in our minds and reach a profound conclusion. We can have inner subjective conscious states. We have consciousness. We have a conscious awareness. We have an awareness that we are aware. So these things we have to take very seriously. And for me, I think it's very important for us to understand that, is there a purpose to life? Is there something more than just us waking up in this massive factory called Earth and just joining everyone else on the conveyor belt? But rather we should think, how did I get here? At least ask the questions, right? And it's very important, especially for us to have a sense of profound meaning. Because I don't like the idea of that we're just here and it's without any purpose. Because I think that is diminishing our own humanity and it diminishes our rational faculties. Because, we always claim to have purpose for our lives. I want to be a doctor. I want world peace. I want to cure cancer and all of these amazing things. But if your own fundamental life, the basis for your life, has no fundamental purpose, then really, intellectually, it's equivalent of saying, let's pretend to have purpose. No different from my kids playing in the playground or at home and pretending to be, I don't know, mummy and daddy and doctors and nurses. It's just a play, right? But we give it such value, world peace and curing cancer and becoming a doctor or an engineer or becoming a teacher. We give these things fundamental value, but how can we do that? We're not intellectually justified if your own very existence has no purpose and has no ultimate meaning from that point of view. So I think it's very important for us to question at least. I'm not claiming you're going to find the answers, but at least raise those questions. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? Where am I going? And hopefully I think this presentation will help you answer these questions. So I really believe that it's a very important topic, and Islam answers the question of why you were here with a very simple but profound concept, which is, well, you're really here to worship God. Now, I know words are vehicles to meaning, and the idea of worship for some people is like, well, what does that mean? Does it mean going to church on Sunday? Does it mean lighting a candle? Does it mean mindfulness? Does it mean meditation? Does it mean just being a good person? What on earth does worship mean? And I totally agree, we have to define our terms. So from an Islamic spiritual perspective, worship is a very profound concept. It entails 4 things. Number 1, to know God, to know the divine. Number 2, to love God, to love Allah, to love the divine. Number 3, to obey God, to obey Allah, which also entails to be humble before the divine. And number 4, which is very critical, to direct and single out all acts of worship to God alone. And these acts of worship include the acts of the heart, like love and reliance, and also the acts of worship of the limbs, which include prayer and charity. So let me just repeat. The concept of worship in Islam is very profound. It entails the following 4 things. Number 1, to know God, to know Allah, to know the divine. Number 2, to love Allah, to love God, to love the divine. Number 3, to obey God, which also entails being humble before the divine. And number 4, to single out and to direct all acts of worship, internal acts of worship and external acts of worship, to the divine alone. And these acts of worship include prayer, relying on God, loving God, includes supplication, charity. All of these acts that we consider good acts, these are acts of worship because we seek a divine reward. So this is what it means to worship God. So let's take it on this journey. And the first part of this journey is to answer the question of what does it mean to know God, right? Now, in the Islamic tradition, to know God really means to affirm His oneness. And there are different aspects to God's oneness. The first aspect is that we affirm God's creative power, the oneness of His creativity. Now, what does this mean? In simple terms, this means that God, that Allah, is the unique and only creator, sustainer, master, fashioner, maintainer, designer, cause of everything that exists. This is what it means to affirm God's creativity, the oneness of His lordship, if you like, or the oneness of His creativity. That He is the sole and unique maintainer, creator, master, and owner of everything that exists. Of everything that exists. The second aspect of God's oneness is to affirm God's nature, God's reality. From the point of view that we affirm that He has names and He has attributes. God has names and attributes. And we can understand this from a rational perspective as well. Because God created the whole universe, we can conclude that God is powerful. Because the universe contains power. To create the whole universe requires power. We could also conclude that God is knowing or wise, or God has wisdom from that point of view, because God created the universe and there's a mathematical order to the universe. There are laws of the universe, the physical laws of the universe, and a lawgiver implies wisdom and knowledge. So we could really start to understand some of these names and attributes even rationally. So from this point of view, we affirm that God has names and He has attributes. Now when it comes to God's names and attributes, we affirm that they are completely transcendent. As the Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like the divine. Now think about it. If God created the universe, He is not of the universe. For example, you could think of this, it's not an analogy, but think of this thought experiment. If I'm a carpenter and I make a chair, I don't become the chair. So by greater reason, the creator of the heavens and the earth is not of the heavens and the earth. He is transcendent. So we affirm the transcendent nature of God's names and attributes. In Islamic theology, what does this really mean? It really means that God's names and attributes are perfect. We believe in a maximal perfect theology, meaning that God's names and attributes are to the highest degree possible. They are perfect without any deficiency and any flaw. For example, when we think about God's wisdom, Allah's name is Al-Hakim. He is the wise. He has the totality of wisdom and knowledge. God has the picture, we just have the pixel. If we have a pixel, we have a pixelated understanding of reality. But God has total wisdom and knowledge. And His knowledge and wisdom is to the highest degree possible. It is boundless and it is perfect without any deficiency and any flaw. This is what we mean by God's perfect names and attributes. Without any deficiency, without any flaw. And His names and attributes are transcendent. Nothing can be compared to God. Nothing at all. The third aspect of God's oneness is to affirm the oneness of His divinity. The oneness of His divinity, or the oneness of His worship. This basically means that God, Allah, is the only deity worthy of worship. And worship is comprehensive. It includes the acts of worship of the heart and the acts of worship of the limbs themselves. And the acts of worship of the heart include reliance on God, include loving God. The acts of worship of the limbs include supplicating to God, prayer, sadaqah, which in Arabic means charity. So these are acts of worship that we dedicate solely to the divine. So just to repeat, there are three aspects of God's oneness, which really is allowing us to know the divine. Number one, the oneness of His creativity, or the oneness of His creative power, which means that He's the only and unique and sole maintainer, sustainer, owner, master of everything that exists. It's the oneness of His names and attributes. We affirm His names and attributes. We also affirm their transcendent nature, and we affirm that they are maximally perfect without any deficiency or flaw. We also affirm God's divinity, the fact that He's the only deity worthy of worship. And these include the acts of worship of the heart and the acts of worship of the limbs. Interestingly, the name for God in Islam is Allah, which is shared also by the Christian tradition. If you read the Aramaic Bible, you will see the word for God as Allah. Allah. Now, the name Allah, according to the Arabic linguist, comes from Al-Ilah, the deity. So He's the only deity worthy of worship. And interestingly, the name Allah has no plural. Has no plural to affirm that oneness. Also, it has no gender, because Allah transcends any type of human qualities from that point of view. So, this is what it means to know God in a nutshell. Now, interestingly, it's very important to understand that anyone who doesn't affirm this, from an Islamic spiritual perspective, has committed something called shirk. Shirk in Islam can be loosely translated as associating partners with God. And associating partners with God is the gravest sin. It is the gravest sin in the Islamic tradition. And if someone dies in that state, they have basically thrown themselves into eternal destruction, if they die in that state. But if they were once people who associated partners with God, then repented and came back to God and opened the door to God's love and mercy, then they are eligible for eternal bliss in paradise. So the door of God's forgiveness and mercy is always open. But if someone dies in the state of associating partners with God, then they have literally created this kind of self-inflicted spiritual nightmare of shutting the door closed to God's forgiveness and mercy, turn the lock and put the shutters down, right? And it's very important for us to realize the grave nature of associating partners with the divine. So if you don't believe God is the only unique sustainer, maintainer, creator of everything that exists, then you have associated partners with God. If you don't affirm God's names and attributes, and you compare God's names and attributes to creation, or you say creation is like God, then you have also associated partners with the divine. And if you don't single out and direct all acts of worship to God alone, then you also have associated partners with the divine. So this is a summary. Now what I want to go into is, well, why is God worthy of worship? And I'm going to give you around 7 reasons why God is worthy of worship. Now before I do this, I want to highlight something very significant. Whether we like it or not, everybody worships. If you're an atheist, you worship. If you're agnostic, you worship. If you're a Muslim, you worship. If you're a Christian, you worship. If you're a Buddhist, you worship. Whoever you are, your reality is you're in a state of worship. And you may be thinking, what is this guy talking about? Well, let me explain. Let me refer you back to the definition of worship. To know God. to love God, to obey God, which entails being humble before the divine, and to single out acts of worship to God alone, which includes things like gratitude. Now, if you take the logic of this and apply it to our lives, we're worshipping something. Because think about it. If there is something that you want to know the most at some point in your life, or there's been something that you wanted to know the most at some point in your life, and if there's something that you love the most at some point in your life, or there was something that you loved the most at some point in your life, if there was something that you referred to as an authority the most, or you obeyed the most at some point in your life, and if there was something that you expressed gratitude towards the most at some point in your life, that's your object of worship. And it's very interesting because the Quran in chapter 39, verse 29, gives us an amazing illustration for humanity. God says, consider the situation, the condition of two people. One person, one man is a slave to many masters and they're all arguing. And another man is a slave to one master. Whose condition is best? Obviously the one who's at servitude to one master, not many masters are all quarreling. So from a pondering perspective, we can ponder over this verse, and it's basically telling us, if you don't worship God, your one master, you're worshipping all these masters anyway. Because think about it, if worship does mean knowing something the most, loving something the most, obeying something the most, and directing your acts of worship to something the most, then by definition, you're worshipping something. And unfortunately, some people worship themselves, right? Their own ego. As God says in the Quran, have you not seen the one who takes his own desire as his Lord? Other people take personalities as their objects of worship, right? You see this with teenagers, unfortunately, right? Justin Bieber fans. You see it all the time. They want to know Justin Bieber the most. Go on Twitter, profile, Facebook, magazines, whatever the case may be. Always wanted to know about this person the most. They love him the most. If it wasn't for his music, my life would be meaningless, right? I love him, write poetry about Justin Bieber. They would even obey him the most, even subconsciously. If he goes out on TV and says, everyone must eat spinach, you'll have all these teenage girls eating spinach, right? And they would also direct acts of worship, like gratitude towards him the most. Like always buy his memorabilia, always buy really expensive tickets, and always think about the next concert and thank him for his existence because it gives them a sense of purpose in a way. I know this sounds like a crude example, but you get the point. You could be more serious. You could basically talk about ideologies. People worship ideologies, right? Ideological constructs. And the people who represent the ideologies. For example, far-right wing extremism, or even far-left extremism, on both sides of the scale, right? The door swings both ways when it comes to these issues, right? You know, you worship the ideology, their books, their people who represent them, right? It's everything for you. They could never be wrong, right? There's a sense of obedience. If Marx said it, then it's true. If Mill said it, then it's true, right? It's like the neoliberal prophets of today. The point is, if worship does mean this, then we're worshipping something. So really, humanity from an Islamic perspective is always in a state of worship. Some worship the one that's worthy of worship, others have misdirected worship. And humbly, it's the role of Muslims with wisdom and compassion to create awakenings within people to understand that take this worship and direct it to the one who is worthy of worship. So really, whether you believe in God or not, whether you're agnostic, however you define yourself, you are in a state of worship by definition. So the question we should be asking ourselves now is, well, who is worthy of worship and why? So hopefully I want to address it today. The first point I want to talk about is that God is worthy of worship by virtue of who He is. What does this mean? God is worthy of worship because of who He is. Let me give you some thought experiments. I like poetry. I try to write some poetry too. I'm not great, but I try my best. And there are some really amazing poets. For example, the poet of the East was called, his name was Iqbal. And he produced some short, very nice lines of poetry. For example, he said, this one prostration that you find too difficult frees you from 1,000 prostrations. Hi, hi, hi. Amazing, right? He's trying to say to us, if you don't worship God, if you worship God, it's going to free you from the worship of everything else. the ephemeral nature of the world, materialism, referring to your own ego, worshipping personalities, ideologies. If you worship your true master that loves you and knows you better than you know yourself, it breaks the shackles to the worship of the ephemeral nature of the world, right? What about Rumi? Some of his stuff is a bit funny, but some of his stuff is really profound. I think he said along the lines of, true lovers do not fall in love. They were already in love before they met. Isn't that true? Like, you know, when you have children, you're like, where have you been all my life? Like, you filled the hole, right? Like, I loved you before you were born, right? And mothers will know this. You love your child before you give them a name, right? And this refers to the kind of prophetic tradition in the Quran about the primordial state, when souls were together, when they were asked by God, who is your Lord? And all the souls, the progeny of Adam, humanity said, you are our Lord, right? And the Prophet Muhammad upon him peace said the souls that were closer to each other had an affinity towards each other. So it's really true that maybe you're already in love, right? As God says, He created mates amongst yourselves. You're already in love before you realize it. Imagine saying that to your wife. Or to your husband, right? I loved you before I knew you. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah? So that's amazing poetry. And when I listen to such poetry, what do I say? What do I do? I'm like, wow, hats off, bravo. Standing ovation, right? I don't only do this with poets, but I do this with wrestlers. Khabib, right? He gave a neck crank to McGregor, right? To McGregor. Tapped him out, right? And when I was on a plane just about to go to Paris, right? And I was watching, I was like, wow. You know, you're in awe of his skill and his attributes of him being a good wrestler. What about football? What about football? Liverpool, such a great team, right? Sorry, bro. He's a Man United fan. You know, Liverpool, such a good team. I don't support them, but they're a great team. Mohamed Salah, right? Great role model. When he scores amazing goals, you're like, that's it, hats off, bravo, amazing. Correct? We'll do this with sporting personalities, we do this with poets, we do this with wrestlers, we do this with anyone. What about famous runners? Who's a famous runner? Mohamed Salah, Mo Salah? Not Mo Salah, Mo Farah. Very similar, right? The poetry's going there, yeah. So, Mo Farah, when he won the double gold in the Olympics, you're like, come on, bro, right? I remember even my son, when he was in the Scouts of Olympics, when he was running the 200-meter race, I was trying to give you some, profound existential advice that it's not about winning, it's about trying your best and, finding, new possibilities within yourself and being grateful to God because you don't know where your limits are. God does. That means you have a new room of possibility to achieve what you can. And, the marks person said, on your marks, get set, go, and he starts running, and what happens to me? I go absolutely berserk. I'm like, bravo, Zachariah! Amazing, Zachariah! Beautiful, baby! Amazing, baby! I go absolutely berserk, and then he comes second. I'm so proud of him, and he looks at me as if he's trying to say to me he discovered something new about himself. So why do I react that way? What happens in one's heart if I react to Iqbal and to Rumi that way, and to Khabib that way, and why do I react to Mohamed Salah and Mo Farah that way, and why do I react to my son that way? Because I have noticed certain attributes in them that I believe deserve due praise. I praise them by virtue of their attributes, even though their attributes don't directly benefit us in any way. And their attributes are contingent and limited and flawed, they're not perfect. So if I'm compelled to praise these limited attributes, then what does it mean about praising Allah, God, whose names and attributes are to the highest degree possible? What does it mean? It means we must give Him an extensive form of praise. And praise is a form of worship. God says in the first chapter, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All perfect praise and gratitude belong to the Lord of everything that exists. Think about existence. Just think about existence, brothers and sisters. It's an interplay of divine names and attributes. It's an interplay of divine names and attributes. We have consciousness. Are you telling me our inner subjective conscious states comes from non-conscious electrons whizzing around neurobiological processes? Are you going to reduce humanity to a pile of electrons? For God's sake, what's conclusion. We have rational insights. We're not just blind. How can a blind taxi driver take you anywhere? Are you saying your mental cognitive faculties are just a bunch of blind taxi drivers? You will never have any rational insights. Think about what's within yourself. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And in themselves, do they not see? There's a universe within the universe, a micro-universe within the macro-universe. Don't reduce humanity to a pile of electrons whizzing around. How dare you claim we have morality then? And there are some non-negotiable moral truths. If everything can be reduced to non-moral, non-conscious, non-rational electrons whizzing around in some random way. Human rights, bro. Really? Nonsense on stilts, as Jeremy Bentham said. Because if you ground that on electrons, it's absolute nonsense. Where's the grounding for this? Come on, man, let's be intellectual, right? Let's be human. You know? We can't have an intellectual moral cake and eat it. We believe in these absolute, non-negotiable human rights and values, but really your whole ontology, your worldview is based on some electrons whizzing around in some random way. Come on, man. Come on. Let's get real, people. Isn't that right? Betty, isn't that right? See, she's agreeing with me. So the point here is, look at this. Who did this? Allah. Right? Think about even biology and the cosmos and species. You know, the closest thing to us, according to biologists, are the ants sociologically. It's not the apes, it's the ants. Because they live in communities, they have cities. You know ants, and check this out. You might be thinking, this guy had a long drive, he's going crazy. That's true, but I'm telling you the truth here, and you can check it out for yourself. Ants, they live in communities, they communicate. Ants have armies. Ants have herd. They have farms. Do you know what they farm? Aphids. And they move it from the lesser green part of the leaf to the greener part of the leaf. And they milk the aphid, and they drink it. How do they do that? Their antennae stroke the back of the aphid, and honeydew pops out, and they drink the honeydew. You may be thinking, this is a joke. Check it out for yourself. Check it out for yourself. These are ants. These are ants. Just think about what's happening in the cosmos. Think about, for example, even the solar system itself. If we didn't have Jupiter, which is a big, friendly giant, Earth would be like Swiss cheese. Swiss cheese, because of its gravitational pull, it pulls the kind of celestial objects that are heading towards Earth. It's like an insurance policy for Earth. What about even the distance of Earth to the sun? If it was slightly closer, relatively speaking, too hot. Slightly away, relatively speaking, it would be too cold. There would be no life. What about the laws of the universe? The laws, the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force. If the strong nuclear force was any different, this universe would possibly be just one big giant black hole. What about the electromagnetic force? It's very interesting. It's one force strength, but it's responsible for so many things in the universe. So there are some amazing things going on. This is an interplay of divine names and attributes to indicate the perfection of the divine, the majesty of the divine. So the point here is, if we can praise human beings that have contingent, limited, flawed attributes, then what does it mean about giving extensive praise to the Lord of everything that exists? And if you don't, in my humble opinion, it is ingratitude. So, God is worthy of worship by virtue of who He is, because of who He is. And not necessarily because He's given us anything. And I want to mention this to the Muslims in particular. Many of us have a forced transactional relationship with the divine. We think that we are both business partners. We give Him some worship and He gives us some good things, like a car and a house and good grades. This is the wrong understanding of the relationship with the divine. The divine is worthy of worship even if you were given the crumbs of the universe. In actual fact, even if you didn't exist, He's still worthy of worship. He is worthy of worship because of who He is, and not necessarily because of how He's decided to manifest His names and attributes in your life. Second point why God is worthy of worship. I want you to think about this, brothers and sisters and friends. There is something in your life that is priceless and is given to you for free, and you don't earn it, you don't own it, and you don't deserve it. So think about this. If someone gave you something that is priceless at every moment of your existence, that you don't earn, own, or deserve, and gave it to you freely, how would it make you feel? Grateful. If I received something that was priceless, that I didn't earn, own, or deserve, and it was free, and I received it every moment of my existence, I would have to be grateful. It would be a moral necessity to be grateful. Well, hear this. You receive conscious moments. Every moment of your existence is a priceless gift. You don't earn it, you don't own it, and you don't necessarily deserve it. You can't even create a fly. And why is it priceless? Well, think about this. If I said you had 10 minutes left to live, and in order to get just another 10 hours, you have to give me all of your wealth, what would you do? You give me all of your wealth. Life is priceless. Let's not be deluded about this matter. And it's priceless, and it's given to you for free. Every conscious moment of your existence. And you don't earn, own, or necessarily deserve it. Who gives it to you? The one who created life itself. So we should be in a state of gratitude. And gratitude is a key to worship. As the Quran says in the first chapter, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All perfect gratitude and praise belongs to the Lord of everything that exists. Gratitude. If we don't understand this, we'll never understand worship in its totality. So that's the second reason why God is worthy of worship. The third reason, God says in the Quran, He actually gives us a challenge. He says you can never enumerate God's blessing. Blessing doesn't say plural, it's the singular, which is a linguistic indication for something here. You can never enumerate God's blessing. Now, I want to basically find an example that you can apply to people who have a life full of suffering and a life full of well-being. And I think I found it. It's the heartbeat. If I said to you, you have 100 heartbeats left, but in order to receive another 10,000 heartbeats, you have to give me all of your wealth, you give me all of your wealth. Usually irrespective of your condition. Which shows the priceless nature of a heartbeat, which is connected to the previous example about life. But the point here about blessing is this. Enumerate individually all the heartbeats you've had so far in a lifetime. Go for it. Actually, be thankful individually for each heartbeat you've had in a lifetime. Thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. It is practically impossible to enumerate all the heartbeats you've had in a lifetime. For the first 2 or 3 years, you can't even count. You've got a backlog, bro. When you're sleeping, you have a backlog. When you're talking, you have a backlog. When you're eating, you have a backlog. It is practically impossible to enumerate individually each one of your heartbeats that you've had in a lifetime so far. Imagine being grateful for them. So it's true, you cannot even count God's blessing, and that's one blessing. And that's why I say to my family, anything above a heartbeat is a bonus. Imagine you really internalize this concept, you'd be so content. Someone slanders you, no problem, life is good, man. And that is the attitude of the pious person, is to be grateful in any situation. So that was the third reason. Fourth reason why God is worthy of worship. If you love yourself, you must love Allah, love God. And loving God is a form of worship. You may be thinking, hold on a second. Isn't this anti-spiritual to love thyself? Right? A bit narcissistic. You know, egocentric, egotistical. Well, the type of love we're talking about is a mature self-love. It's the self-love that Eric Fromm in his book, The Art of Loving, he speaks about. Self-love means that you want goodness for yourself. Even the 11th century theologian, in his magnum opus, the Ihya, the revival of the religious sciences, and the scholar was called Al-Ghazali, in his 36th book of his magnum opus, when he writes about love, intimacy, and contentment with the divine, he says essentially that self-love is wanting good for yourself. So loving yourself means wanting good for yourself. So the argument here is if you love yourself, you have to love the divine. Why? Well, Al-Ghazali talks about this, and he says, who created you? Who creates the physical causes that you use and manipulate in order to embrace pleasure and run away from pain? Who is the source of love? So if you want good for yourself and you love yourself and you don't love Allah, who is the source of all of this, then you're in a state of spiritual delusion. Fifth point, which again is related to the fourth point, but let's focus in on the concept of love. In the Islamic tradition, one of Allah's names, one of God's names is Al-Wudud, which means the loving. And it comes from the Arabic word wud, which means a loving that is giving. In the Islamic tradition, we believe God's love is maximally perfect with no deficiency or flaw. It's even greater and transcendent from the perspective of if you were to try and compare it to the greatest love you've experienced in this world, which usually is a mother's love. And mother's love is contingent. She needs to love. It completes her. God doesn't require any completion. He actually requires nothing. One of his names is Al-Ghani. He is independent. He is free. He requires nothing. Everything depends on him. But yet he loves. Yet he gains nothing by loving. But he loves. It's the purest form of love. And it's maximally perfect to the highest degree possible. So if God is the loving in this way, then we should be compelled in our hearts to love the divine. And how do you love the divine? Allah says in the Quran, say, speaking to Muhammad upon whom be peace, say, if you love Allah, follow me, follow Muhammad upon whom be peace, and Allah will love you and forgive your sins. So from this point of view, understanding who the divine is will make us be compelled to want to love him. Think about this thought experiment. If someone comes into this room right now, and we can all collectively describe that person as the most loving human being to have walked this earth, I don't care who you are, something's going to be compelled in your heart to try and understand what that love is, or to gain that love, or to experience that love, or to find out what's going on. God's love transcends that, and is far more maximally perfect. So we should be compelled to love the divine. 6th point, why Allah is worthy of worship. Obedience. People think, how can you obey God? You don't live in the 14th century, bro. You obeying God, is that very backward? Is that very medieval? Hold on a second. Obeying God, and listen to my words very carefully. Obedience to the divine is the peak of rationality. It is the summit of reason. It is the summit of your intellectual endeavors. Honestly, obedience to the divine. Why? Well, think about this. Don't we obey and refer to things all the time? I mean, even in Western epistemology, the study of knowledge, you have an area called testimony. Don't we refer to the testimony of others because we can't know everything? Even Dr. Elizabeth Fricker, she basically says, given that my limitations are parametric, I have to refer to the authority of others. I'm not going to know everything, right? When you go to the doctor and you give the symptoms and she or he gives you the medicine, do you start questioning the doctor? Oh, what do you know? You studied for 10 years, but what do you know? Do you go to the pharmacist and say, you're wrong, the molecular structure of this compound is actually something else, you've given me something different? We don't even do that because we refer to the authority of others. What about when you go on a plane and the pilot says, or the steward says, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be experiencing some turbulence. Please sit down and fasten your seatbelt. No one is allowed to use the toilets at the present moment, right? So what do? Do you sit down and buckle up? Or do you say, you know what, I'm going to do a moonwalk on the aisle? Or a bunch of burpees? Or some pull-ups? Of course you know. You refer to the authority of others, although you may not know nothing about the science of turbulence and what's going on. We do this all the time, so it's a cop-out to think, hey, how can you obey something? You obey things all the time in your life. Even when we look at fake news, right? They're terrorists. Okay, they're terrorists, right? We just obey it straight away. Right? He's great. Okay, he must be great, right? We refer to people all the time. Even in science. I had a debate with Professor Lawrence Krauss, And he had a metaphysical presupposition that all truth can only come from observation. Very shallow philosophy, of course. And I said, there are other sources of knowledge. He was like what? And I said, testimony. Then he almost sniggered at me. I said, fine. Do you believe in evolution? He said, yes, I do the science. And I said, have you done all the science yourself? Have you done all the experiments yourself? No. You have to refer to the authority of others, even in the scientific method. The body of knowledge of science is so big, you can never do all the science yourself, even if the claim is repeatable and testable. You have to refer to the authority of others. So obeying others is fundamental. If you study Western epistemology, study of knowledge, and go into testimony, read the works of Professor Cody, Benjamin McMillan, Keith Lehrer, Elizabeth Fricker, and others, you see that it's fundamental. I mean, even if you've never been to China, the fact that you believe China exists is fundamentally testimonial. You have no empirical evidence, even if someone looks Chinese. Because someone had to tell you that looks Chinese. Right? Even if you, to be honest, even if you get on a plane, oh, I'm going to China, bro, yeah, China exists. Really? You have to obey an authority, a testimony of someone saying that you're going to China. Oh, I've seen videos. Still testimonial. I'll even go as further as say that many of us, we believe the world is round. Not because of science. We don't even know the science. We don't know the maths. We don't know anything. We just obey it by virtue of testimony because we've seen pictures, bro. Really? You have to obey someone's testimony that someone said, that's the picture of Earth. Right? You haven't done it yourself. You haven't gone to a cliff and you've seen the curvature. Even if you have seen the curvature, it doesn't mean it's round. It could be a flower shape. Right? So the point is, a lot of the beliefs that we hold are testimonial. Like even how our biology works. You just read in a book. You just obey an authority. And this is not a problem. I'm not trying to say that it's wrong. I'm saying we need to be awakened to the fact that we refer to the authorities all the time and obey people all the time. So, if we can obey those authorities, what about obeying the ultimate authority, the divine? Mic drop. Right? He is Al-Hakim, Al-Alim. He is the knowing, He is the wise. He has the totality of wisdom and knowledge. Allah has the picture, we just have the pixel, if we have the pixel. So it just logically follows it is the most rational thing to do to obey the divine. This doesn't mean suspend your reason. Because you have to find out, well, what does God mean? What does God intend? This is part of Islamic jurisprudence, part of the nuances of the Islamic sciences. We have a nuanced moral philosophy for sure. But once you understand what God said, game over. He knows and you don't. By virtue of who He is. And we're limited. And that's why we must have spiritual, ethical, and epistemic humility. I'm never going to know everything. So we must obey the divine, which is a form of worship. Finally, it's who we are. In the Islamic tradition, we believe that every human being is born in a natural state. This is called the fitrah. And this natural state has forms of knowledge. You could call it proto-knowledge, you could call it primary knowledge, but this knowledge is that God is a reality and He's worthy of praise. And we see this even in cognitive psychology, that we have an affinity to attribute design to things, causality to things. We praise things by virtue of their attributes. This thing is quite embedded within us. Also, what I discussed earlier, that everyone is in a state of worship by virtue of the fact that if we define worship as loving something the most, knowing something the most, obeying something the most, and directing acts of worship to something the most, we have a deity. It could be yourself, it could be your ego, it could be your ideology, it could be a celebrity, it could be a spokesperson, it could be a politician, it could be materialism itself, who knows? But the point is, if this is the definition of worship, we're worshipping something anyway. Even in communist China and Russia, they were worshipping, they were at awe of other things greater than themselves. They had big statues of Mao and Stalin and Lenin, right? And they venerated Marx and his ideas, right? From the point of view that it was bordering, or at least it was a form or an expression of worship. So it's part of who we are. Worship is actually part of who you are, and I really believe that if we come home to our nature and we create those awakenings within us, that we realize that actually the one that is worthy of this worship is the divine, is Allah, is God. And the 7 reasons I've articulated hopefully are robust enough reasons to why God is worthy of worship. And look, I'm going to be very, very honest with you. We have to make a choice after rational investigation and spiritual insight and raising these existential questions, because the consequences are quite severe. Because in the Islamic tradition, if you consciously deny this and reject this, you are eligible for eternal self-destruction. But if you accept this and you come back to your nature, you're eligible for divine bliss. Because what is paradise really? Barring all the descriptions that we read in the Quran, really, in essence, paradise is that you're in a state in which you don't want to be in any other state. That's bliss, right? So who doesn't want bliss? Now, a few questions may arise. One question is, well, does God need our worship? No, not at all. God in the Quran, Allah says that He is al-Ghani, He is independent, He is free, He is rich. We need to worship God because it's good for us. God doesn't require worship at all. In actual fact, in the Islamic tradition, if everybody in the whole universe were to worship the divine, it won't increase His majesty or bounty. And if the whole universe were not to worship God, it wouldn't decrease His majesty or bounty. So God doesn't need our worship in any shape or form. It's actually good for us. But another question may rise. The question would include, well, why did God create us to worship Him even though He doesn't need it? Well, one response is, well, think about it from a practical point of view. When someone has artistic attributes, they will at some point inevitably express those artistic attributes. God has names and attributes. For example, He is Al-Bar, He is the source of all goodness. So it makes sense that He would not only tell the greatest story ever told, but bring it into reality. And isn't the greatest story ever told that human beings would be created with free will in order to potentially be raised to virtue of the highest ranks so they could achieve eternal bliss with the Creator in paradise? That's one of the most greatest stories ever told. So this story that we're playing now is an expression, a manifestation of who God is. Just like an artist would inevitably do art, the divine, he will express His names and attributes, and in this particular case, He is Al-Bar, He is the source of all goodness, and the best story will be told, and we are living out one of the best stories ever told. And it's our choice to basically accept divine grace and mercy, or to consciously close the door. And it's very important for us to understand that we have spiritual windows in our lives that sometimes are open and closed. And it could be a death in the family, it could be anything. It could be struggles, it could even be happiness, it could be having lots of money, it could be losing money. These things are windows of opportunity for us to reach the divine, come closer to Allah. Sometimes they're closed though, sometimes they're open. Maybe today is a window of opportunity that's wide open, right? So we have to take these opportunities very, very seriously and not have a heart that is hardened, that closes these doors and windows, and we've consciously stopped the grace and mercy and love of the divine. And you may be arguing, well, why does God let me close it? Well, you have free will. And imagine God forced His special mercy and love on you. It would have no meaning. If I put a gun to your head and said, give charity, your charity would be absolutely meaningless. So we have the conscious choice to open the door of grace and mercy or to close it. The choice is yours. So, may God bless every single one of you. And I mean that truly from the bottom of my heart. Everyone, whoever you are, whatever background you are. I heard good things about Wales. You know, you're a good bunch, you're a friendly bunch. There's a lot of people from different backgrounds. You know, stay strong, stay together. Muslim, non-Muslim. It's very important to follow the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad upon his peace when he went into Medina, and he said that, you know, you should pray at night, you should feed the hungry, and you should spread the salam, spread the peace. And this was including everyone, including Muslim and non-Muslim. And it's very important to appreciate the prophetic tradition. That's an authentic tradition that can be found in Tariq al-Kabir in Bukhari, which is a collection of prophetic traditions. The Prophet ﷺ said, love for humanity what you love for yourself. The Arabic here is not ahihi, your brother. It says linnas. Linnas, for humanity. Nas, for the people, for humanity, what you love for yourself. And this should be a basic value and ethic of Muslims living in any community. And, you know, always consider this your home. It is your home. You're not going anywhere, that's for sure. You're growing in size, that's definitely for sure. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, keep on growing. And you're growing in size, and you need to see your fellow citizen and brother, sister in humanity as your qawm, as your people. If you don't, then it's an ethical disgrace. Because the Anbiya, the prophets themselves, they were always concerned, and they would say, Ya qawmi, oh my people. oh my people, even to the point where Lut alayhi salam technically offered his own daughters to the people of Lut. That was such the care that he had for his people. And the greatest care that a Muslim can have for their fellow human being is to share this beautiful message, because it's about eternity, not about this finite life, and also to be a decent human being. And I'm going to end with the verses of the Quran. When Allah says in the Quran, in chapter 41, verse 34, good and evil are not the same. Repel by that which is better. And if there was hatred between two people, it would turn to intimate bosom friendship. Interestingly, the word repel in Arabic is not followed by a direct object. So it could mean repel anything by that which is better. The scholars say repelling anything by that which is better means repelling things with something that is more beautiful and something that is more virtuous. So become people of beauty and become people of virtue. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Hamza, thank you very much for quite an emotional, passionate, amazing lecture. We've got a few minutes now before the buffet will be opened, so we're just going to see if we have any questions that we can direct towards the speaker, inshallah.
Yeah, I have some question. I mean, two questions.
Just do one at a time, and then if we have time, we'll come back.
Okay, Stephen Hawking, he said philosophy is dead. So what do you think about that? Because we know in science we don't have a free will, and if you look philosophy, we have a free will and morality as well. But in science we don't have a morality and free will. So what do you think about that? And next question is...
Can we just do one first?
Let me do this before I forget, yeah? So you're saying Stephen Hawking said philosophy is dead.
Yeah.
I think a lot of philosophers would now say Stephen Hawking is dead. I don't mean that in a bad way, but look, what's very interesting is that you have to understand that popular science books sometimes say these things just to capture the attention and follow a kind of ideological presupposition of a particular worldview. I've studied philosophy on a relatively advanced level. I'm on my third postgrad in philosophy, and let me tell you something, yeah? There's no such thing as a philosophy-free science. Anyone with a gram of a brain will understand that there is no such thing as a first principles or philosophy-free science. Everything has philosophical baggage. If you study the philosophy of science, go to even the atheist, Elliot Sober, philosopher of science, is an atheist. Go to Goethe, go to Rosenberg, go to Stathis Psilos, fellow Greek, yeah? Go to all of these philosophers of science, and some of them are scientists, like Goethe is a scientist as well, I believe. They would talk about the presuppositions and philosophical assumptions in science. There's no such thing as a philosophy-free science. The minute that you have to look at multiple observations and create a conclusion is the minute you're doing philosophy. Like even Bertrand Russell, when he defined science, he was basically saying, well, you have multiple observations and you reason over the observations. What do you think that reasoning is? It's philosophical exercise. You're making an inference. An inference is a philosophical term, right? Induction. Science is essentially premised on induction. What's induction? Induction is a thinking process where you start from a known and you move to the unknown. Or you start from limited observations and you make a conclusion for something that you haven't observed yet. For example, and I'm very well so I can say this, imagine you observe 1,000 white sheep. You're going to conclude the next sheep is going to be white. But you can have a black sheep, right? I'm the black sheep of the family. So the point is, and that's probabilistic, because you may have another observation that contradicts your current conclusions that was based on limited data. That's the beauty of science. That's why science 100 years ago is not the same as science today. Because you explore it, and essentially, there's no such thing as a philosophy of science. So for example, for my MA, I specialize in the philosophy of the mind. And if you look at neuroscience, for example, neuroscience is premised on a philosophy which is called physicalism. Physicalism is the view in the philosophy of the mind that consciousness can be reduced to, or is identical in some way to physical processes. That cannot be proven per se going to neurobiological studies, because Neuroscience is a study of correlations. Yeah? So fundamentally, you have to be premised on a philosophy. So, you know, people want to make money, they write books. What can I say? Like, look at Richard Dawkins' book. It's still #1 in the agnostic and atheism list. And I'm telling you, it is the most ridiculous book anyone has ever read. Straw man, ridiculous philosophy. I don't even believe it's respected. What about the other guy? Hitchens, God is Not Great book. That is literally, it is trash. And I'm not saying from an arrogant point of view. Anyone who studies philosophy will laugh at that book. Laugh at that book. Yeah? But these things are respected. Why? Because we don't live in a world of insight anymore. We live in a world of popularization, of slander, of basically, you know, ideology, excessive ideology. And the door swings both ways because the Muslims are like this too. You know, we have a intellectual and social gangster as well that we have to sort out. So we have to understand that it's not just, you know, the new atheists, right? Or it's everybody. Everyone is suffering from this disease at the moment. You know, I blame social media a lot for this, yeah? So, anyway, to cut long story short, I'm really sorry. Philosophy is alive and kicking, man.
Okay, so the next question is
Can we
about...
move to the others, and then if we have time, we'll come back.
It's really important.
It's not
please.
fair on the other people, brother, please.
Okay.
If we have time, we'll come back, inshallah.
Okay.
If we have a question there.
Sheikh, mashallah, your speech breathed a lot of passion for the worship of Allah.
Yes.
How do you advise we maintain this passion and spirit?
Good point. I mean, I think a lot of my passion is probably inherent. You know, I'm Greek, man. We break plates at weddings, so you can't get more passion than that from that point of view. And if you were to call my mom's house, you probably think that we're screaming and shouting, but we're just having a normal Greek conversation. So maybe a lot of it is inherent, that's for sure. But you know, the existential philosophers will say, if you don't have a passionate life, you haven't really lived. And passion doesn't mean you always have to express it. It could be internal. And I think intuitively, to be passionate about something, you have to firstly really believe it to be true, and you have to practice it. It has to affect your state of being, because Islam is not just a belief. Because the belief, for example, in philosophy is very mundane. I believe this is a pen. Are you saying the belief that this is a pen is equivalent to Islam? The belief of Islam? Of course not. Islam is more than a belief. It transcends a belief from that point of view. Islam is a form of knowing that changes your heart, changes what you say, and changes how you relate to yourself, how you relate to others, and how you relate to the Creator. It changes your state of being, because humans are not human doings, we're human beings. We become in the world. To be is to become. We become in the world, right? So from that point of view, it changes the way you relate. And this is how Iman, faith, is described in Islam. What's in your heart, what's in your tongue, and how you act. It changes your state of being, how you become. So Islam is not only just an abstract, mundane belief, but it has to really resonate within you. And that's why we have to really understand Islam holistically, because, look, I know what good food is, right? Vegetables, whole grains, right? But do I always eat good food? No. I could write you a book probably on how to be a good parent. Am I a good parent? Probably not. I'm not the best. I'm trying. We're all suffering, right? We've got weaknesses. So my abstract knowledge of something doesn't really change me. Knowing doesn't always mean that you're going to becoming it. There is a gap. And Islam, its spiritual tradition, tries to bridge that gap. And the way to do that is not only to abstractly believe, but to manifest it. So when you be, you do, then you become. So that's why prayer is very important. You be passionate about worshiping Allah, then you do worship Allah, right? Do your remembrance of God, do your prayer, read the Quran, give sadaqah, give charity, and all of these things. And as you do that, your iman increases. So your relations with things improves, and your state of Islamic being increases. So, yeah. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Some people say that is faith philosophical, or is it just something totally spiritual, and there's no sort of philosophy in
It's
there?
a very good question. Look, terms like faith and philosophy are in a way alien terms to the Islamic spiritual tradition anyway, because they are post-secular terms. Because when you think of faith, it's just faith. It means you have no justification. This is not the case with Islam. This is not the case with Islam. we don't just say, oh, have faith in something, meaning, just close your eyes and take the jump. No, we believe like the word for faith that's translated, that the word iman, which is loosely translated as faith, is iman, right? The word in Arabic is called iman, which comes from the root to feel secure. So we have justifications for our belief. Those justifications may not always be philosophical, for sure, right? We don't have we don't cage our intellectual capacities. We know there are so many tools that we have, intuition, our fitra, our innate disposition, our rational faculties, our heart, all of these things come into play for us to justify why we believe Islam is the truth. So things like philosophy and faith are slightly alien terms. They have some connection, but they're alien. We have things like iman, and things like bayina, and things like burhan. So iman means to feel secure, right? And bayina means clear evidence. Burhan means conclusive proof. And those things can mean revelation, proof from revelation. It could be from a sound, rational mind. It could be from intuition. It could be from awakening your innate disposition. So Islam is a different paradigm because it doesn't see the human being as a functional robot. The human being is not just an aql. Aql is intellect in Arabic. The human being is a ruh, is a soul, is a nafs, is like an ego or a self. The human being is a fitra, is an innate disposition. The human being has a qalb, which is a spiritual heart. And the aql, the intellect, is a function of the heart in the Islamic tradition. So when we think about what the human being is, we have to understand the human being is as God told us, not as we think, as if he's some kind of abstract, functional, computerized mind. That's not the case. So when you look at terms like philosophy and faith, they have to be understood through the lenses of what the human being actually is. And the human being is not a robot. Even cognitive science today is coming to agree this anyway. Your beliefs are not very good predictors for your behaviors, by the way. Yeah, and that's known in cognitive science, right? So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions from the sisters? No? Okay, so.
My question is in regard to free will. So many things Allah has written for us that cannot be altered. So when we describe free will, what can be altered and what cannot be altered, or are there categories of things that we can alter and we cannot alter?
I'm going to be very honest with you, right? From my limited understanding, the whole free will question can never be answered. Game over. But so what? How does that undermine the fact that God is a reality? How does it undermine the fact that he has revelation? How does it undermine the fact that he's worthy of worship? And how does it undermine the fact that he said you have free will? It doesn't. It just means you just can't answer the question. It's one of those questions that doesn't undermine the veracity of Islam. And I think even trying to go too deep philosophically in that question is irrational. Let me explain why. Because the concept of free will and qadr and predestination and divine decree are things that relate to God's wisdom and knowledge. For you to really fully answer the question, you are subtly implying that you're going to know all of God's wisdom and knowledge, which is absolutely impossible. Because the minute you do that, either you become God, which is impossible, or that God is no longer God, which is also impossible. So there are some questions that we can't answer. Now if you look at the Quran, from my limited understanding, the concept of free will and qadr and predestination and divine decree is not there as a philosophical exercise. You know what it's there for? To free you, bro. That's what it's there for. Because God says, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no true power apart from the power of Allah. So what is God saying? That these so-called obstacles in the universe are not true obstacles. They don't have intrinsic power. They're just empty tools that God uses to manifest His irada, His will. So connect straight to Him. It's supposed to give us wings to fly. But we don't do that anymore. We blame the whole world and his wife. Oh, it's the colonialists. Oh, it's the Zionists. Oh, it's the media. Oh, it's the right-wing Islamophobes. Oh, it's the government. Really? Really? When you couldn't wake up for your Fajr prayer, was the government underneath your bed? Really? Was the Islamophobes hiding behind your door? When you were being naughty to your mother and disrespecting your wife and hitting your wife and doing these evil things? Where were the Islamophobes and the colonialists, all these people? It's a disempowering philosophy. Let me tell you something. And Muslim should never be in a state of victimhood. It's a pathology. Yes, we're victimized. So what? Get over it. The greatest disaster that happened to our community was the death of the Prophet ﷺ. This is well known according to the scholars. So anything else is fine. In contrast to the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So don't worry. Chill. Just chill, man. Don't blame these things. Don't think, if I change this government, and I change this person, and I change this media, we're going to be fine. Really? You're still going to hit your wife, you're still going to go pray, you're still not going to do good deeds. It's very disempowering to think that the power of destiny lies in other people. In Islam, we believe it all belongs, it's all from God. That gives us true power to transcend our suffering. Right? To transcend. But some of us, we act as if God is a mouse, na'udhu billah. But He is the creator of the heavens and the earth. Kun fayakun. He says, be and it is. Right? This is your Lord. So act that way. And realize how to connect with Him. And God gives us the answers. Allah says in the Quran, all you believers, return to God. Do tawbah. Return to God jami'an, collectively, in order to be successful. Allah says in the Quran, indeed, Allah will not change the situation of the people till they change what's within themselves. That is true power. Because now you can control the outcome. You've got the divine connected solution to solve your situation. And trust me, it's not always blaming X, Y, and Z. Yes, we're victimized and we need to take people into account and command the good and forbid the evil. But it must be understood within this metaphysic that at the end of the day, all of this is happening because of God's will. These things don't have any intrinsic power. And this will give you wings to fly. You know, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions would be called crazy today. They would be called majnoon. They'll be locked up. They'll be called, you're crazy. You know why? Because they were the equivalent of a village in Oldham. And after 13 years of one man in a book, they took over Europe, spreading peace and justice and mercy everywhere. And some of them, they just had sticks. Because they were connected people, right? And they understood that these things don't have any intrinsic power. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. All power. There is no true power apart from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it should give you a sense of empowerment. Don't be victimized. You know, when the Prophet was asked by his daughter, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, what was his worst day, he brushed it off like it was nothing. That's how empowered he was, because he was always connected to Allah and understood this is the divine plan. And whatever Allah chooses for you, you can never choose anything better. You know? It's all khair, man. Right? So it's supposed to give you wings, mate, not confusions.
Okay, last question. I'll come back to you.
Thank you. We have a quantum fluctuation from the beginning of the universe. So I want to ask,
We know who's we and what does know mean?
Science, you know. So did Allah make the universe with a kun fayakun or using the law of the nature?
Well, the laws of
Because
nature
sometimes,
are an expression of kun fayakun, isn't it?
No, because sometimes God will say خلق السماوات والأرض, and I think He didn't use kun fayakun for the universe. And you know, we have a multiverse, so we can't say Allah it is khallaq. He's not khaliq, He's a khallaq.
He's
So
perpetually creating, yeah.
yeah, so we can't say there's a multiverse. So the universe came from the, maybe multiverse. So that's mean.
And where did the multiverse come from?
Yeah, I want to explain that. So God, Allah made the universe using the law of the nature, and He's seating the law of the nature.
Okay, so what's wrong?
I want to understand that. Does Allah make the universe using kun fayakun or not?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't know how to answer that question. But all we could affirm is that God created everything, and that's it. And everything else really is secondary. Because science, if you study science and the philosophy of science, it's changing, right? Like, they may think universe came from a quantum fluctuation. They may have different models. In actual fact, when you study Big Bang, and when I studied philosophy of science, I understood this, is that the Big Bang, we think it's one evidence, one model. No, it's some observations, right, which are not conclusive, and there are around 17 different models to explain the same data, and many of these models, they have the same epistemic weight, meaning that they explain the data well, but they disagree with each other. This is called underdetermination in the philosophy of science. So, take it, enjoy it, but it's not conclusive.
Thank you.
Alright?
No worries.